how important was this when you first started? Was there something like, oh, I want to create, or you talked about creating versus recreating. So in my head, when you first thought, hey, I can do something with this, I can be one of the world's greatest clarinet players, was that part of that thought process, or were you thinking more of the existing repertoire?
Oh gosh, it was really, really basic, I was nine years old when I started. And at that level, the level of consciousness I had about wanting to play music was on a very basic level. Like, I'm playing the clarinet and I like it. And it's really, that's where it lived. And so the whole historical context, or even the context of where I was as a kid in 1989 America, Chicago, was not why I was playing the instrument. I just liked it. And it's been a steady process of discovering my love of just the music simply, even for many, 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 many years. It was really just like a basic love of the sound of the music and how the music made me feel. I think as I developed into not just a clarinet player, but as a musician, and then further as a someone who considers himself and who the world considers an artist and a creator, then you start to examine what music means not just to you as a clarinet player, but you start to see yourself from outside of yourself, and then you can start to have philosophy about what music can mean, your music particular playing can mean to the society at large. And so you have to have some perspective. I think when you're a 9-year-old kid, that kind of metaphysical thought about what you're doing as a musician didn't really come into play in my life until much much later. But then you can use that to connect in different ways, powerful ways.
So Adam, as someone you spend your time primarily creating new music, where do you think that spark, or where do you think that change started happening for you?
Yeah, I mean, lots of I mean, I want to follow up to Anthony, just of what he said was, very eloquent and beautiful. Just something I've always been thinking about. When you are, we're all privileged to walk out on a stage because not everyone is given that opportunity, and there's so many people out there wanting that opportunity. And so, something I remember from my Juilliard days with the former president, just Polisi, he always, he had a book and he always talked about, being a, artist as a citizen. What is your role as a citizen, but you're also an artist. And so to think about the community you're working with and to think about your role and what you can do with music, that has very deep meaning. And so I just wanted to follow up on that because it's something I do think about when I get to go work with people and especially do master classes, from elementary school aged kids through grad students. And for me, I really am just a creator. I'm a terrible, I mean, to a professional pianist, I'm terrible. To a non-professional pianist, I'm probably pretty good. Uh, so, but my greatest strength is as an improviser. And my father was a world-class improviser. I mean, he still is, but he's not performing anymore. And even Keith Jarrett's manager back in the day tried to sign him, and we probably would have had a very different lifestyle had he gone that route. And so for me, my parents said I started sitting down at the piano around the age of 3 or 4, and every night before I would go to bed, where I grew up in a tiny town of 750 people in nowhere, Massachusetts, it was my emotional outlet. It was sort of a way I could express myself because even to this day, and I've gotten better as I've aged, but I tend to keep things in. And music was always an emotional outlet. It was a way for me to release those thoughts, whether it's happy thoughts or anger, frustration, whatever. And so it was always just this release. And that's really what composing music is for me today. It's a story, whether it's a personal story or an abstract story or a third party story. It allows me to tap into the subconscious and communicate in a deeper level that sometimes goes beyond words. But for me, it's always creative.
Maestro, artist as citizen.
I mean, I think we all evolve as human beings and musicians as we get older. And I think we're all about the same age. And I think that helps. I love what Anthony said and Adam, like you're doing it for yourself. And then you think about doing it for other people and what that means. As an emotional outlet, as a musical outlet, as a potentially like just an egotistical outlet. Like I'm doing music. This is important. And then you realize, wait a minute, who's receiving this music? As a composer, as a clarinet player, as a conductor, who's the audience? Who's in the orchestra? For me, I think about really trying to empathize with who's the musicians in the orchestra. Having played an orchestra, I really think about that. And then like, what's the audience? What is the average citizen and the audience going to get from this experience? And I think that turning point is really, it's really interesting because we all at 7 years old, at 9 years old, at 12 years old are extremely selfish human beings. Like it's in our nature. And you three people are friends of mine because you at some point turned into really amazing human beings where you're like, no, I'm not thinking about my clarinet sound or my reed today, but I'm thinking about my friend or my audience member or the recipients of this friendship and also this music. And I think we all have to get to that point at some point. It turns. It's really interesting that it goes from we're all in a void. We're all in a practice room for so many hours a day, and to change that focus from ourselves to the audience, to the citizens of the city, is really interesting. And I think particularly as music director, I realize how important that is in Omaha and any community I'm working in. How important it is to change that lens from inward to outward, and how beneficial it is when you do a concert, a concerto, a new piece, a general concert for people who don't expect it or aren't used to it, and you see their smiles and you see their general uptake of what you're giving and they have no context. It's so rewarding. So then it gets back to ourselves. It becomes again very personally rewarding, but you see that joy, and it's just a really wonderful process. And it's something only live music can offer. And I think we are lucky to be able to offer that to people and also benefit from that experience. It's such a give and take, and we're very lucky to be able to do what we do.
Do you think that there is, we're all 21st century American musicians. You three especially are 21st century American musicians. And do you think at all about what would be different if for some reason you happen to be playing in Germany or France? How do you think your trajectory or your sense of what is now important would be the same? Something Maestro and I've talked about quite a bit is finding a way of making Omaha feel like an American orchestra, championing American music, American artists, really celebrating the history we have here.
Personally, I don't think I'd be working in Germany. I feel like my time, my vocation, conducting, my passion is here. It's in America. It's in Omaha. It's in live music. It's in living composers. It's in these really wonderful artists. Even though I champion German works, and I feel like I bring something to that table as well. I think if I was in 1750 or 1850 Germany, I would let other people do the job. Like, honestly, I don't know, Adam, if you're composing in 1929 or 1829, where would you be at?
I mean, it's such a tough question and answer. I mean, truthfully, I think no matter what period of time you're alive, that's the contemporary time. And so that's the music of the time. So if it were 1829 somewhere, whatever that would be, I think, the music. But for me, I mean, I agree with you, Ankush. I mean, I'm very distinctly American. Like I I mean, the greatest compliment I think I've gotten from people, it's like, oh, it's as if Radiohead met Aaron Copland. And
Love it.
and and um and I like that. And so, I can't really say much more to that. I mean, you are who you are, where you are, how you're raised shapes so many things about the music you listen to. I mean, for me, like the music I grew up listening to was honestly not classical music. I mean, in my car, it was Tribe Called Quest and Outkast, Jamiroquai, Stevie Wonder, and then some other stuff. Like, and then my father's like, you should listen to a Mahler symphony. And I'm like, who? And then I start listening to Mahler, and I learned a lot. I mean, you learn so much from every composer, and I'm totally going on another tangent, by the way.
That's a huge jump. Anthony, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I agree with both of them. We are who we are. It's hard to make a jump to anything else than to how we are existing now, and in so many different ways. And and on one hand, if I look at think back to my life, growing up as a Black kid on the South Side of Chicago, could I have imagined being here where I am? But in other ways, that is exactly the reason that I'm here playing the music I'm playing, is because I grew up exactly where I grew up. I am who I am, and my parents are who they are. And they introduced me to music, luckily. And in that space in Chicago, I was able to be introduced to those people. That pathway looked like it did because of who I was, not in spite of it. And I was lucky to be able to do that, and to have that particular journey to where I am today. But so I wouldn't imagine that I could you can't be someone else. I think that's what's interesting about all of us as artists, as people. You are who you are, and that actually, with its challenges and with its privileges, that kind of creates one's life. And taking advantage of those privileges, but also the growth that you encounter because of the challenges, from whatever space you grew up in, whatever challenges you faced in your life kind of make you into who you are and to the artist you are. I think it's hard to imagine something else, especially for musicians and artists. So much of, for instance, like Adam mentioned, so much of his creativity is from listening to all of those people we mentioned, not in spite of it. It gives him his unique, a special American voice. And I think the same.
Do you remember what your gateway was? So you said like age 9, you just fell in love with the clarinet. Was there a piece? Was there a moment? Was there a teacher? Was there an experience that you were like, oh, hey, this?
Yeah, there were probably lots of them, but my brother, Damari, was a professional flutist, principal flute of the Seattle Symphony. And so there were probably lots of gateways because he practiced so much. And I probably saw him perform at Interlochen, or actually in Chicago. I saw him perform with Chicago Symphony when he was like 15 or 16 years old. He soloed on the Cacciatorian flute concerto with the Chicago Symphony. So that was obviously a gateway. But personally, there were many, but one I always go back to is this tour of Japan that my youth orchestra did, Chicago Youth Symphony. And Michael Morgan was conducting, and I was too young to be in the orchestra, but they let me in, and let me go on this tour and tag along with my big brother. And I was playing like last or double clarinet on Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony, and I do remember that being like kind of an eye-opening event. Just because of the circumstance, kind of being a young kid traveling the world, but also being on that stage, hearing the sound, the sheer sound of that, and getting chills. And so there were a lot of those moments. growing up. So
Adam, Ankush?
Yeah, for me, I'm technically called a late bloomer. I probably, it's funny. I always say this story because I feel like now being a father, I see it in my kids as well. You seek what you know, even though you don't necessarily want to seek it all. And so my father, as I said, is a piano improviser and also a composer, and so I think I avoided it for most of my childhood, even though it was very much me. So I was really an athlete growing up, and I went to college to play soccer, Division III Oberlin, but Oberlin also has a world-renowned conservatory. But I just went to the college, and after my first semester in the college, I felt a little bored, and said, you know what, I'm going to look at the conservatory and see what's happening over there, and apply. And so I applied and got in, but not as a composer because I didn't have any music written. And I got into their technology and music and related arts program for sort of electronic music. And then there was a fluke in the registration system because that same year I think they went online, and or maybe it was still analog because I started college and I graduated high school in '98. So, but in any case, I essentially somehow enrolled in the first year composition majors course in the conservatory for fall semester of my sophomore year, and I show up and the professor's like, "Who are you? You didn't audition. What's going on?" And I said, "I'm in your class," and they said, "I need to see some music." And I was like, "I'll get it to you." And then 6 weeks later, my very first piece was I think it was a solo flute piece, perhaps. And then they allowed me to stay in the program. So it was just so I was so behind. I then buried myself in the library. So the real moment for me that was total inspiration, my sophomore year, December, I hear the film score to American Beauty by Thomas Newman, which totally changed my life. The film score to The Red Violin by John Curigliano, who later became my mentor because I said I need to study with that person. And then Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time, that piece, the diversity of that piece, but specifically the cello and piano solo movement of those open 10th major chords, which also gets used in a lot of Thomas Newman's music. And that sound world and collage of color, I was like, holy smokes, this is it. And this is what I'm going to do. And I never looked back. I knew right after a month I was going to go to grad school. Right after a month of my master's, I said I'm going to go on and get a doctorate. And then that was it. I didn't stop.
So just to reiterate, faked it till he made it. Going from the Oberlin soccer team into composition and then doubled down. And Anthony managed to tag along, even though he was too young for Youth Symphony, for a world tour to Japan for Shostakovich 5. All right, Kush.
And wait, but let me just jump in. Let's just admit that you were not a real soccer player, and that was the late '90s admission scandal. Sorry, that Oberlin soccer team does not really exist.
Oh,
You just
so
made
funny.
that up. You just made
Adam's
that up.
parents paid off.
Totally.
Sorry.
They paid off the athletic director. Well, what's actually funny is, so Oberlin soccer team, we weren't great. We were okay. But the football team was historically known as the worst football team in all of America.
I love that. It's like, yeah, Adam, go to Oberlin.
To beat
There's a-
Ohio State.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you did beat Ohio State?
Wait,
I mean-
yeah, we missed it. You froze for a second.
I think they were the last Ohio team to beat an Ohio State, but that was probably in like the early 1900s.
Yeah, 1920, 32. I would say there's so many gateways, and I think a lot of what our friends have talked about is building on experiences. For me, in terms of conducting, there's all kinds of stories, but I remember being in a record store, like records, CD player, like, and just going through. And honestly, like, not dissimilar to Adam, I would start with the soundtracks. I would be like, okay, I love John Williams. And then you just would go through the pieces that you loved and the movies that you loved. And then you're like, okay, so like Raiders of the Lost Ark is not that different from Dvorak. and like Star Wars is not that different from Holst. And so like the gateway pieces for me from like, you know, I played French horn, I played violin and piano, not as well, but I played French horn. So I was thinking about John Williams, and then you realize, okay, John Williams is not that different from Strauss and Mahler. And you just kind of build upon the recording library. I was kind of a nerd about recordings. And then once I got into Dvorak 9, I was like, oh wait, there's 15 recordings of Dvorak 9 and they're all different, you know, for me. And so I would like discern which my favorite conductor. Then I realized the conductors had a role in those performances being different, and the orchestra. Like Berlin's different than Akron, that's different than LA, that's different from Singapore Symphony. You know, all lovely and different. But like I started being able to discern, like I could hear an oboe sound and be like, oh, that's a European oboe, or that's an LA oboe, that's a French oboe sound, just from the recording without knowing. So then I just became kind of obsessed with those sound worlds. Conducting came much later. I didn't start conducting until I was a senior in high school, college, and then lots of really wonderful teachers. I'm very lucky, but it's building these experiences and these gateways that kind of happen, and all of a sudden you find yourself in front of an orchestra, whether it's Omaha Symphony or National Symphony or New York Phil or whatever. And it's just like, I don't really plan. I never planned for that. I was always in the music and thinking about the sound, if I honestly speaking of. But yeah, it's a weird journey, and the conducting story is completely different in another time.